Danger Dolan. The 1980s, times were tough and games were even tougher. The original Nintendo was notorious for its catalogue of super difficult, if not sometimes impossible to beat games. Some of them were difficult because of their shoddy controls, but instead let's focus on the top 10 truly hardcore games, the classics. Starting as always with number 10. So Metal Gear, it was originally developed for the MSX by Hideo Kojima, who happened to direct the rest of the super successful series. So the MSX version had the design intention that you sneak around a base instead of shooting people up constantly. Now that game was a classic, but the Nintendo Entertainment System version was developed by a third party and not that great. The reason it was so ill received is because enemies respawn every single screen change. There are traps that you couldn't possibly expect and you can only learn through trial and error. Some paths just lead nowhere for absolutely no reason, as if the developers were having a laugh. And every time you die in this game, it takes you all the way back to the beginning. Unless you want to put in a hilariously long password every single time to pick up where you left off. That's not to say that the original game on the MSX wasn't difficult, but this one took it to a whole new level. And now moving on to number 9. The original Mega Man was a platforming nightmare with sudden drops. You need extreme precision to make it onto the next platform, a lot of trial and error. And it's not even deep into the stages that you encounter this difficulty, it's right at the very start. If you don't jump onto a moving platform at specifically the right time, you will fall and die instantly and start all over again. When you get hit by any enemy, there is no grace period, no invincibility. You either beat your enemy properly or you die. And even though in traditional Mega Man games bosses are still hard, in this one, some of them are borderline unbeatable. In later games you could experiment and actually still beat a boss even if you don't know their weakness, but in this game you must do research to find out exactly how to beat the boss. And once again, there are no passwords, there is no way to save progress, you either beat the whole game in one go, or you do not. Every part of this game you must learn patterns, and you must get them down pat. If I could sum up Mega Man in one word, it would be ultra-frustrating. And now let's move on to number 8. Now Festus Quest, it was more tedious than super difficult, but that doesn't mean you're not going to get killed over and over. It just takes forever to kill anything, and in that time you could get clobbered by many respawning enemies. Not to mention, every time you get hit by anything, it makes your character slower. So in that respect, the difficulty actually increases based on how bad you are, and because enemies appear out of nowhere unexpectedly, you're going to be slogging through this game at an absolute snail's pace. This game had many problems, not just difficulty, and that is why it appears on this list. And now let's move on to number 7. Double Dragon 3, who could forget the infamous Bimmy and Jimmy? And yes, there was a typo on the very first screen you see. Now the original Double Dragon could only handle 2 enemies on screen, at least for the Nintendo version. You also couldn't do co-op. Whereas this game goes in the completely opposite direction. You have many enemies and they gang up on you. If you are between 2 enemies and they are wailing on you, you are dead. There is no escape. You have the spin kick, which is like a 2-second grace period, and then 3 more guys are gonna jump out of the bushes and you will die. Now this wouldn't be so bad, this requires skill and positioning your guy so you're not gonna get beat up, but you only get 1 life in this game, and your health bar just drops so rapidly. The only way you're going to beat this game is if you have 2 players. But when you do convince somebody to play this game with you, it is so fun. And now we move on to number 6. Now Contra is not just one of the best Nintendo titles, it's also one of the most difficult. You have tiny bullets flying at you from all directions, sometimes hard to see, but it's never unfair. You have very quick, very fast, very agile enemies, you have turrets constantly shooting in one direction. But most of the difficulty in this game comes from the fact that you only have 5 lives. Good luck beating the game with that. Even at the arcade that was horrendous. However, you could put in the Konami code and it boosts it to 30 lives, which is pretty much the only way anyone could beat it. I was first introduced to the Contra series on the DS, and they let you select your difficulty option. And even on easy, the game was still hard as nails. It's not even about pattern recognition because everything's so chaotic. You just have to have FPS reflexes. Now Super C on the NES was also hard, probably harder, but Contra also took a while to get used to. Once you have played Contra enough, you can master it and actually beat the game quite a few times. Even potentially with 5 lives. But Contra was a classic, everyone's heard of it, and that's why it appears on this list. And now we move on to number 5. If you were a kid growing up in the late 80s, you of course were into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now in this game, which had a difficulty spike so cruel that to expect kids to be able to complete it at their age was ludicrous. Enemies constantly regenerate, they are randomized so you never know what's going to be around the next corner. There are time limits on levels, there are traps everywhere, you have a very, very small amount of life. There is chaos constantly. And for some bizarre reason, when you're in the sewer section, your turtle can drown. Your turtle can drown. Now you can alternate between Raphael, Donatello, Leonardo and Michelangelo. They all have different skills, but the key is to keep Donatello safe since his pole is super overpowered. You can literally stand above a boss and attack downwards and defeat him without him even touching you. This game was outrageously difficult and everyone knows it. But now we move on to number 4. Ghosts and Goblins, a series defined by how tough it is to beat. You take 1 hit from the enemy, you lose your armor and you are naked. You take 2 hits, you are dead. There are so many enemies on the screen, sometimes it feels like you are playing Contra. But the worst part of it is, after you have slogged through the entire game, all of these worlds, you finally beat it. You have to play through the entire game again just to be able to see the credit screen. That's right, you gotta play through the entire game, the same game again the whole way through. And when you finally do get to the end, you get one of the worst victory screens ever, full of spelling errors. There has never been a bigger slap in the face of a gamer in history. The game is still fun, and it is horribly difficult. And now we move on to number 3. Now you get plenty of health in Ninja Gaiden, but what you're gonna die from over and over are the pits. There's an awkward bounce mechanic every time you get hit that sends you hurtling back without any control. And throughout the stages you get countless enemies and bats that appear out of nowhere, and they are the ones that send you hurtling into pits. You will jump over to another platform, a bat will appear out of nowhere and slam! You fall down, over and over. Sometimes the platforms you're jumping onto already have goons on them, and as soon as you touch them you get knocked back. It's a very small margin for error no matter what. The trick is to memorize the patterns to see where the enemies are coming from and make sure you avoid those spots. Sometimes it is random, and it's mostly skill, but it's all just trial and error. Now when you die, you don't automatically go back to the start of the game, but it's bad enough that if you are, let's say, 4 levels into stage 6, and you're at one of 3 final bosses for that stage, and you happen to get killed once, it will send you all the way back to the first level in stage 6. Of course, people still really love this game, even though it is horrendously difficult, but this is a true testament to skill and persistence. If you get frustrated easy, this is not the game for you. And now moving on to number 2. So I'm sure most of you have heard of the infamous Silver Surfer at one time or another. And the fact of the matter is, it was cruelly designed. Just like Contra, there are millions of bullets flying everywhere, but the board you're riding is in fact huge. Not wide huge, but long ways massive. And you get 1 life, you get hit once, and you restart the entire level no matter what. There is no health bar, there is nothing like that. You either get hit, or you win, and you will get hit over and over and over. You don't even have to get hit, you can touch the wall and die. Nobody beats this game. Nobody. And when you die, you see a screen of Silver Surfer sobbing. This image will be burned into your retina forever. If you thought beating Contra on 5 lives was difficult, try beating Contra with 1 life and never touch a wall, and you will understand how difficult Silver Surfer is. But now let's move on to number 1. Oh yes, Battletoads. I put this at number 1 because it's a classic, it's more well known to everyone, and it is super hard. And what's crazy is playing with 2 players is actually more difficult than trying to beat it solo, mainly due to friendly fire and the fact that you share lives. If one person dies, if your buddy is bad, then you both lose. And sometimes you don't even do it on purpose, it's by accident. At places like the Turbo Tunnel, which is that racing sled section, it is borderline impossible. It is where pretty much everyone gives up on the game. You need the reflexes of a panther. Those sections were way too long to expect you to memorize exactly when to make every single jump. And it was so fast that even if you did memorize them, one mistake and splat, you're dead. Then you finally manage to make it to the ice level and you lose all your lives. You start all the way back at the beginning. It is unreasonable, and everyone remembers it happening. Anyway, that is it for this top 10 list. If you would like to suggest another top 10, visit Reddit linked down below, and have a good one.